So I guess I wanted to move to our second issue, which is really a very important one as far as the election goes, and that's third-party candidates, and particularly no labels. And full disclosure, I've been a supporter of no labels in the past and have really supported what they've done. But it really concerns me that they're talking about running a third candidate, because I think, I've never seen any proof that third candidates can really win. And the more polarized the environment gets, I think the less likely a third party candidate winning and the more fanciful it becomes. And also because Donald Trump is unique in the sense that his 30%, and this is what helped him get elected before, isn't going anywhere. So the other candidates will split the other part of the vote. And more on top of that, this election is unique in the sense you have two candidates who, when there's voters who don't want either, which is frankly most of them, they break overwhelmingly for Biden. So a third party candidate, I think, would hurt him a lot more. So Bill, I know you've been obviously very involved with no labels and you have a lot of thoughts on this. So I'd love to hear what your take is on no labels and the whole third party candidate issue in the 2024 election.
Yeah, I'm really where you are, which is in principle, I'm not against third parties or independent candidates. And I think as a matter of principle, one might want to look at ways to loosen up the two-party duopoly. And you could do that, all kinds of rules of primaries, open primaries, the ranked choice voting, fusion voting. There are a lot of things that that's actually happening in some localities and states, and maybe should happen much more around the country. And I think that those are very promising things. And I think that could happen over the next few years. It's just not going to take decades necessarily to change some of our election rules. And people are working on that. But I also, and I think No Labels has done some good work over the years, and especially in Congress with the Problem Solvers Caucus. But I am very wary and pretty much opposed to their effort in 2024, because I do think I don't think it's a symmetrical problem. Look, in 1992, people voted for Perot. I didn't think that was a particularly wise vote. But Bush and Clinton, I could see people saying to themselves, look, Bush has been a good president, but we need some fresh thinking. Clinton's kind of fresh thinking, but a little problematic. I'm voting for Perot. But you know what? The world's not going to end if it's Bush or Clinton. I think that's a legitimate way of thinking about it. I was but I was part of the George H.W. Bush White House, and I wasn't happy about that way of thinking about it. And I think Perot did us actually more damage than he did Clinton. He gave an excuse to sort of Republican-ish voters to desert, and a lot of them did. But as I say, I don't think it was Perot himself probably shouldn't have been president, so it was a little irresponsible to vote for Perot. But it wasn't crazy, as I say, if your choice is Bush or Clinton. I do think Trump is unacceptable, and it's an asymmetric situation. And Biden's been a pretty decent president. I personally wish he had handed over he had sort of taken the attitude of I'll be a one-term president. I'm going to be the bridge to the future, the transitional president, and I'm going to try to make sure the party nominates someone good, i.e. moderate, for 2024. But it's going to be Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro or whoever you want, and not me. He didn't take that point of view. I don't blame him. It's risky to go through a primary process, and he did beat Trump, and he thinks probably could do it again, and he thinks he's been a pretty good president. I rather agree with that. But so I would prefer if the Democrats were making their generational change this year rather than 4 years from now. And I do think that is what's incidentally made the No Labels pitch appealing. We got Trump, who tried to overturn the last election, Biden, who would be the oldest person to run for president at 82. We can do better. And there's something instinctively, appealing about that until you say, wait a second, what's the most likely, not necessarily the case, but most likely effect of that. The most likely effect of that is a third-party candidate who takes about 2-to-1, for reasons you said, Dave, votes from Biden and conceivably help select Trump. So I'm against a third-party candidate in 2024. I'm not against exploring ways of changing our election rules or even recruiting people conceivably for 2028. I'm not against either doing it at the state level where you can find someone better outside the current two parties than within them.
So yeah, no, I agree, Bill, that and Dave too, like that a third party at this juncture would probably hurt Biden more than Trump. And I have a hard time thinking that there's any third party candidate who would really capture the imagination and draw enough people to actually get over the victory line. Also because there is such deep loyalty for the two entrenched parties. So I just think it's a really, really high bar. And I don't know anybody who could cross it. I mean, maybe you guys know, but I can't think of anybody right now. So, it's interesting. I lived in Israel and I reported on the Knesset for the Jerusalem Post, and they have a parliamentary system, which is very fractured and multi-party system. And it's even more dysfunctional, I would say, than what we have. So as much as the two-party system is, doesn't, sometimes it's Coke or Pepsi, it can be pretty generic or just not offer people what they want. In many ways, I think it's more stable. So in that respect, I think, I'm pro-America when it comes to two parties. But I think the fact that, you have the Joe Biden, I agree with you, Bill. I think for the Democrat Party, there's such deep right now unfavorables for the president, especially on economic issues. And now Trump is outpolling even DeSantis against Biden. And if it were held today, he would probably win, pretty strongly because of how terrible the economy is. So I don't know why Democrats aren't pushing Biden to retire, but I'm not a Democrat.
Well, to be fair, A, the economy isn't as bad as people think it is, arguably, and B, it's not like if Biden retired, the Democrats still wouldn't bear the burden of, having to defend, of course, Biden's policy. So in some ways, it is complicated. I think it's an actual political calculation whether Biden or a successor would be a stronger or weaker candidate. I'm with you in generally defending the two-party system, and I studied political science and taught it, and my view is very much your view. I'd say the two-party system in an era of extreme polarization, though, and I did a conversation just this week, was released with Doug Sosnick, who was Clinton's political guy, which he really goes into this in some depth, and you can take a look at it if you want to conversations with Bill Kristol. Sosnick really makes the point of the degree of polarization now, and it's really mostly driven. The parties reinforce it, but it's driven by deeper forces in the country, obviously, socioeconomic sorting and geography and a million different things. And so once you combine the polarization with the two-party system, you can get a sort of toxic mix in a way that the two-party system was precisely a moderating force. It took in the extremes from both parties, made them work with the establishments, if you want to put it this way, of both parties. And you ended up, I'd say, with a reasonably healthy outcome for much of American history and certainly much of the, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But you could argue it started to go awry. And when you have polarization and, limited turnout in primaries and only two parties, you can get the opposite phenomenon, which is a kind of spiral of extremism as opposed to a virtuous spiral, if you want to call it that, towards moderation. So that's again, it's an empirical question in some ways. It's dependent on a million things. It's contingent. The Lord did not tell us, two-party systems are better everywhere and always, and they didn't tell us multi-party systems are better everywhere and always. So you do have to adjust one's judgment. I'm sympathetic to the no labels people in this respect, of saying things have gone a little awry in this country. And if you look at a lot of Europe where they have Israel's a mess, but if you look at a lot of Europe where they have parliamentary systems, you could argue they have these centrist coalitions that govern pretty decently in a lot of countries and are better and to marginalize the extreme left and the extreme right. And that's not such a bad outcome. So I think it is complicated, and these reforms often don't turn out the way you think. So I've just been focusing on the short term. I'm for other people exploring these reforms, but in the short term, I think Trump is too dangerous to run experiments in 2024.
Yeah, and here's some political trivia. The last third-party candidate to get any electoral votes, George Wallace, okay? Ross Perot, even though he got 19% of the vote in 1992, didn't get a single electoral vote. And I think Bill's point there is one that's underrated, and that is that in 1992, because both candidates were considered pretty centrist, people didn't think they were wasting their vote. But when it comes to like the existential threat to the country, which a lot of people on both sides now think the other party is, people are much less likely to do that. And I would also say, if you're going to build a third party, or frankly, if you're going to build anything, you start from the bottom, right? Build a foundation, build a philosophy, build a network, get organized. Don't just start from the top. This to me is about money and power. This is not about really what's best for the country. So hopefully enough people will be able to talk them out. And as far as other candidates, how about, the Democrats have a great history of letting people bubble up you'd never imagine. So Roy Cooper's just finishing his second term as governor of North Carolina, a purple state. Andy Beshear has a 60+% approval rating in Kentucky. All right. Bill mentioned Gretchen Whitmer. So I think Jared Polis is very strong. I don't know if
Polis is good.
ready to elect a gay president yet, but we're getting close. So there's plenty. The bench has talent, but Biden has no business running. Carrie's heard me say this like I'm a broken record, but it's a real issue. And the bottom line is it's best case scenario. It's very risky, right? Because all it takes is one major health event, one bad fall or something. And people are going to say, you know what? The guy may be a fascist, but gas and food were cheaper. We didn't get in any wars, blah, blah, blah. They'll rationalize it. And it's just too big of a risk to take.
I've been where you are, Dave. I mean, the counter argument would be it's too big of a risk to go through a Democratic primary and end up with either Vice President Harris, who isn't popular, I think, and or even a more radical candidate. It won't be the ones we like, the Polises and the Whitmers and the Coopers who emerge. I don't agree with that as it happens. I really think that the majority of the party is more on the moderate side, but it would be a messy primary. Remember those Democratic debates in 2019? They weren't really great for, and Biden then pulled it out kind of miraculously there in February, March 2020. So it's hard to know. I would say one thing: I think the Democrats are alerted to the problem of no labels and of a allegedly centrist candidacy. They're a little too complacent, though, about Cornel West, who says he's going to run as an independent on the Green Party ticket, and others who might do that kind of thing. I mean, the Democrats have lost. They sort of don't want to think about this, but they did lose elections in 2000 and 2016, arguably, and pretty seriously arguably, because of independent candidates, third-party candidates on the left. I mean, Gore really would have won Florida, I think, if you hadn't had Ralph Nader on the ballot. He took more votes from Gore than Buchanan did from Bush. And then in 2016, I think Hillary maybe wins the key Midwestern states if Jill Stein isn't on the ballot. And so, I mean, at least the number of votes she got was larger than the margin. And they should worry more about even a fringy left-wing candidate, because you are in such a polarized and such an relatively even environment. One of the reasons Biden won in 2020 when Clinton lost in 2016 is there were the third party, the wasted vote, so to speak, was about, I think, 1.6%, if I remember, but I think under 2%, compared to about 6% in 2016. And the data does show that those voters who were dissatisfied with both parties and with both candidates were, when forced to choose, when there was no alternative to vote for, went more for the Democrats and more for Biden. And then the broader polling does show that in general, the double haters, the pollsters call them, the people who don't like either, break about 2-1 for Biden, sometimes even more, 3-1. So I think Biden benefits when it's forced into a two-party choice and can get hurt to the degree that either on the left or in the center, there's a chance to sort of flake off, whereas the Trump voters aren't flaking off anywhere that I can see.
Bill, I know we got to go quickly, but to what you were just saying, do you think RFK Jr., if he doesn't get the Democrat nominee, would he run as a third party?
Well, it's a good question, Carrie, and I actually thought about that. I mean, he sounds so much like Trump in certain ways, though, in terms of his being anti-Ukraine and sort of vax, critic or denier or whatever the right word is, anti-vax. I mean, I kind of assume that he'll lose the Democratic nomination and then show up at the Republican convention to head up Democrats for Trump. And incidentally, he's entitled to do that. People like Kasich headed up Republicans for Biden and try to bring some of his voters over to Trump. But I suppose that's possible too. I wonder if he would take more votes from Democrats or Republicans. He's running such a Republican-ish sounding, Trumpy sounding campaign. On the other hand, the name Robert F. Kennedy would have a certain appeal. So, I mean, there are a lot of wild cards. People look at the polls today, and I do this. We all do this. You got to go with whatever data you have, right? And say, it looks like it's going to be this, it's close, it's this, so-and-so's stronger in this state. I mean, so much could happen. I mean, look at just the world, not just back from Europe, foreign policy, Ukraine, what's going to happen with the indictments, which way that affects things politically, and a whole nother Supreme Court term, to get back to what we started speaking about. So, I mean, it's a very fluid situation.
Well, I do agree that RFK is a Democratic version of Trump in terms of, never meeting a conspiracy theory he didn't like, and the deep state is out to get us and all this. But I think this is yet another warning sign for Democrats, because I think these type of candidates typically are more of a symptom than the problem. And this just underlies the profound dissatisfaction that a huge percentage, and don't forget, he's polling over 20%. That's not insignificant. This is a profound dissatisfaction that Democratic voters have with Biden, and they're longing for another alternative. So this is yet another warning sign, which I hope they will heed, because it's very, very risky. Well, folks, I think that's it. We've had such a stimulating conversation. Bill, I just can't thank you enough. I really hope you'll come back on the show. Always fun talking shop. And thanks so much for joining us on Practically Political.
No, my pleasure, and great to see you both, Carrie and Dave.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to you all. We'll catch you on the next episode.